Central Asian steppes may seem lifeless at first glance. Dry grass stretches to the horizon, scorched by the relentless summer sun and lashed by icy winter winds. The landscape is almost barren, the color palette of the steppes oscillating between faded ochre and muted grays. This is a realm of survival, where harsh conditions and the struggle for every drop of water, every crumb of food, take center stage. Yet, in this seemingly desolate setting dwells one of the most inconspicuous and simultaneously astonishing creatures, the manul, or Autocolobus manul scientifically, a small wild cat with incredibly dense fur and a flattened face. The genesis of life in a nest. Hidden from prying eyes in a crevice of rock, nestled somewhere among the hills, a mother manul had established a relatively safe lair. Here, far from birds of prey and nomadic wolves, she gave birth to several kittens. Among them was the youngest, the tiniest, whose eyes were still closed, but whose fur already shimmered with a light down, promising to eventually become as thick and warm as his mother's. Manuls have always preferred solitude, but in this brief, almost singular period of coexistence, the time of growth and nurturing offspring, the mother protected her kittens, warming them with the heat of her fur. The first days were relatively peaceful, the noise of the outside world barely reaching their shelter. In such semi-darkness and silence, life was budding cautiously, as if shy of the desolate steppe, which was ready to swallow and scatter any weakling who hadn't yet gained strength. Manul kittens are unlike their adult counterparts. Their fluffy tails seem disproportionately large compared to their small bodies, and their eyes are enormous when they finally open. In our little hero, these eyes were particularly expressive, reflecting something he himself could not yet comprehend, a curiosity about the world, timid yet strong. The mother manul, an experienced female, had raised kittens before. She knew every threat that could lie in wait for her and her offspring, and therefore constantly listened to every rustle, every breath of wind capable of carrying the scent of a stranger. Encounter with harsher reality. When the kittens grew older and began to venture beyond the shelter, the world revealed itself to them in all its perilous beauty. The steppe was scorching hot in summer, but the nights remained cool, sometimes even cold. For the little manul, the rustling of grass under his paws was unusual, as were the pungent smells of herbs and lichens growing on the stones. Occasionally, clouds drifted across the sky, and then the earth blossomed with a fleeting palette of shadows. The mother patiently taught her kittens to hunt small rodents, ground squirrels and picas, which were their primary source of sustenance. Each hunting lesson was accompanied by silent movement and a swift attack. Such was the manul's science of survival. For the youngest kitten, everything was more challenging than for his more agile siblings. He was slightly smaller in size and seemed more cautious. Even then, he displayed traits that would later play a fateful role. He would gaze at the desolate landscape for a long time, as if expecting something inevitable to happen, and he lagged behind his brothers more often. Large birds of prey, golden eagles and eagles, often soared above the steppe. An adult manul could survive by hiding under rocks or blending into the steppe in silent hunting, but the small kittens were too conspicuous and helpless. Every time a large shadow appeared in the sky, the mother manul would lay her young on the ground and press close to them, trying to make their fur blend with the grass and prevent them from betraying themselves with any unnecessary movement. Her instinct told her there were many threats, and not just from above. Inevitable separation. Disaster struck unexpectedly and irrevocably. Manuls are masters of stealth, but even they are not immune to humans, who can appear anywhere, especially if a hunting trail passed nearby or some locals were grazing livestock and decided to scour the area. One evening, as the sun was already setting and painting the sky in crimson hues, the mother went out from the lair to get food for her kittens. She never took them too far while they were so young, believing it was safer nearby. The little manul disobeyed. His curiosity got the better of him. He followed his mother on thin paws, moving deeper and deeper between the stones until he reached a small slope. From above, he saw her, majestic, spotted, and graceful, stalking a pika. But then, from somewhere to the side, came a crackle, a clang of metal, and sharp human voices. In fear, the mother manul took flight, and the pika slipped away into a crevice. The kitten did not understand what was happening. He only heard guttural shouts and sensed unfamiliar smells. The human voices grew closer, and the mother manul saw one of the hunters raise some kind of stick. Perhaps it was a weapon. She darted aside and perhaps in that same second thought of her young left behind, but instinct prevailed. To lead the humans away from the nest, she ran into their line of sight and sped across the steppe, hoping they would chase after her. The kitten, seeing his mother disappearing into the twilight, tried to move after her, but at that moment he tumbled down the stones and hit something hard. His head spun and his eyes darkened. When he came to, moonlight was already emerging from the twilight. Neither his mother nor his brothers were nearby, only a bone-chilling wind and the rustling of dry grass. The distinct smell of humans still hung in the air, causing the little manul to press himself into the ground, trying to become invisible. He could not know where his family was now. The hunters, hearing the past noise, had scattered around the area, and the kitten, crawling on sore paws, moved away from the potential danger. Away from his mother too, though he, of course, did not know it. Desolate night, the beginning of solitary wanderings. Night caught him far from familiar places. The wind intensified, bringing with it a sharp cold. The times of day in the steppe are treacherous. Even after a hot day, a fierce cold can strike. The flattened blades of grass seemed alien and hostile to him. The stones, menacing giants. Tormenting thirst gradually overcame the kitten, because by evening he had not had time to drink and he had not received his mother's milk for a long time. Hunger surged in waves, but most of all he was afraid of loneliness. Only recently he had felt his mother's warmth nearby and heard her purring, but now only the mournful howling of the wind remained. His legs trembled with fatigue, but fear gave him strength. He slowly crawled from one boulder to another, trying not to be seen by predators. The starry sky above his head seemed boundless. In such conditions, even adult manuls adhere to their territories, each stone becoming a foothold in the endless hunt and survival. But for a small kitten, any movement seemed like a feat. Sometimes he stumbled, fell, his heart pounded wildly when a shadow flashed past or a rustle sounded. At dawn, anxiety and fear mixed with despair. He had not found food or water. When the first rays of the sun began to illuminate the grass, the kitten noticed a small puddle formed at the base of a stone after a rare rain. Other inhabitants of the steppe had already drunk the water, but there were still thin streaks of moisture on the stone surface. The weakened kitten greedily licked them with his rough tongue. At that moment, his light eyes glistened with tears, but manul tears remained in his soul. Because in wild animals, even weeping is hidden from the cruel world. The first trial by hunger. Hunger was unbearable. Parents usually feed kittens for several months, gradually accustoming them to solid food. But our kitten was left alone too early. Without the skills of a real hunter, without a mother who would continue to bring prey, he had to rely only on instinct. Manuls, unlike some large cats, cannot afford to be lazy. Their prey are small animals, fast and agile, and the kitten's strength was running out. He sniffed at every swaying blade of grass, trying to discern if a ground squirrel was hiding there. But his pathetic attempts ended in failure. Either the rodent escaped, smelling an unfamiliar scent, or the little predator became exhausted, not even starting a real chase. Over time, he learned to lie in wait near small burrows, knowing that a pika or a ground squirrel might poke its nose out and perhaps become vulnerable to attack. But he still lacked both experience and endurance. Most often, he retreated, demoralized by failure. By fate's will, he once managed to catch a sick or too careless mouse. This episode almost became the happiest moment for him. He tasted his first real prey on his tongue, albeit a tiny one. Warm blood awakened primal instincts, made his heart beat faster. Perhaps in these moments the pride of a small predator sounded in him. He had succeeded, he had survived another day. But the joy was short-lived. There is no time to celebrate victory in the steppe. Every minute is a new struggle. Clash with other predators. The wanderings continued. The kitten went further and further away from the place of separation from his mother, almost losing hope of finding her. Wherever he moved, the steppe seemed the same. Only occasionally did rare bushes of saxol or other plants and gentle rocky ledges come his way. His stomach cramped with hunger. Moreover, lack of strength affected his vigilance. One night, when the kitten was trying to hide from the wind behind small boulders, he suddenly felt someone's heavy gaze upon him. Turning his head, he saw a pair of burning yellow eyes, slightly above his own height. Fear enveloped him like a chilling cloud. At first, he could not make out who it was, a wolf or a fox. Approaching a little closer, the predator turned out to be a steppe fox, a corsac. For an adult manul, a fox did not always pose a mortal danger. A manul could fight back using long fangs and sharp claws. But the Malish was too weak to engage in a fight. The kitten tensed up, his ears pressed to his head, his fur stood on end, his tail tucked in. He let out the most menacing growl he was capable of. The fox made a move forward, bared its teeth, and then the little manul, overcoming fear, uttered something between a hiss and a piercing squeal, trying to scare away the enemy. Perhaps the fox was full and saw no point in getting involved with an aggressively nastroyenim, albeit small, but still predator. Or maybe she smelled another person or heard distant sounds. Whatever the case, the fox abandoned the kitten to his fate and disappeared into the twilight. But this incident once again reminded him, here every moment could be the last. Unexpected help in a raging storm. Time passed, the weather changed. Autumn was approaching, and then winter. In the steppes, this means not just a cold snap, but the onset of a fierce winter silence, when snow and wind become the main masters. Experienced adult manuls settle in their shelters, preparing for severe frosts. For a kitten who was not even 6 months old, the harsh winter threatened imminent death. However, in the steppe, it happens that the weather can change instantly in autumn. A hurricane wind blows in, a blizzard or dust storm begins. And on one of these days, when the gray sky was overcast with heavy clouds, the cub felt the first prickly snowflakes on his whiskers. Snow mixed with dust plastered his fur. He was literally choking in the icy vortex. His eyes were tearing up. Visibility dropped almost to zero. He desperately tried to find at least a small crevice in the rocks where he could squeeze in and wait out the storm. But all in vain. The wind knocked him off his feet, his heart pounded. It was getting colder and colder in his chest. Suddenly, through the howling of the blizzard, he heard some new sound, like the barking of dogs. This meant the presence of people. For wild animals, a human is a source of danger, but at that moment, the fear of the storm and imminent death outweighed all other fears. Staggering, the little manul trudged towards the sound. He did not know what he would find there. Perhaps an even faster death would overtake him there. But instinct pushed him to seek at least some shelter. It turned out that a nomadic camp of local shepherds was located nearby in the steppe. They had set up several yurts around which dogs were milling about. Dogs in such places are often used to guard livestock and dwellings, and therefore treat any wild animal with suspicion or aggression. However, the kitten's plight left him no choice. He approached a small structure from which a warm smell of smoke emanated. It was probably a yurt with a hearth burning inside. But dogs were also nearby. Seeing the kitten, they growled and rushed forward. But the strong wind and snow seemed to hold them back, and the kitten managed to slip into a gap between the boards that served as support. There, he literally fell onto a pile of dry grass, apparently intended for kindling or feeding livestock. Tired and exhausted, he curled up in a ball and fell asleep. Perhaps if someone from the people had seen him, a sad fate could have befallen him. Manuls are caught for their fur or, in the best cases, they try to sell them to zoos, although it is very difficult for them to adapt there. But for now, no one noticed him. Everyone was busy saving property from the snow and dust storm, securing leather strips on the yurts and hiding livestock. The storm raged all night, and in the morning light, the kitten quietly crawled out of the shelter and trudged on. It is surprising that this little manul was able to survive the night. Perhaps the slight warmth of the fire seeping through the walls did him a good service. Golden Eagle attack and new trials. Days went by. The kitten, no longer quite a kitten in age, began to grow stronger. His fur, although now dirty and matted from dampness, still remained thick enough to protect him from the cold. He learned to lie in wait and watch, discerning the slightest movement in the grass. Several times he managed to catch mice and small lizards, which he tore apart with difficulty with his tiny fangs, extracting at least some calories from them. But fate was preparing new blows for him. One clear morning, when the first light illuminated the steppe after a night frost, the little manul decided to go out into the open in search of a rodent colony. Silence enveloped the space, and it seemed that nothing would disturb his hunt. Suddenly, a swift shadow appeared in the bluish sky. A golden eagle. Its claws, sharp as blades, could easily tear apart even an adult hare, let alone a manul teenager. Sensing danger, the kitten pressed his ears and crouched to the ground, trying to blend in with the scorched grass and sparse bushes. The golden eagle was drawn by the unusual movement on the ground. This predator has sharp vision, capable of catching the slightest vibration. The bird circled in the sky, gradually descending. Its wedge-shaped body and outstretched wings inspired terror. The kitten felt the danger hanging over him. His heart pounded so loudly that it seemed the golden eagle could hear its beat. When the eagle went on the attack, folding its wings for a swift dive, the manul frantically darted aside towards the nearest stones. Everything happened in a matter of seconds. A terrible swist of rushing air and claws, designed for a deadly strike, whistled literally a dozen centimeters from his body. The kitten tumbled head over heels, raising dust, but miraculously managed to slip into a deep crevice between the boulders. The golden eagle screeched several times with its beak, trying to grab its prey, but could not squeeze into the narrow space. Wings beat against the stones, a sharp cry of disappointment echoed. For some time the eagle circled over this place, hoping that the kitten would poke out. But the zverok hid so deep that he was ready to sit there all day. In the end, the formidable bird flew away, leaving behind only a terrifying cry that spread across the steppe. After this collision, our manul felt a sharp pain in his shoulder. At the last moment, the golden eagle still managed to slightly snag him with its claws. The shallow wound was bleeding and the smell of blood enveloped the kitten, attracting other scavengers. For several hours, he lay in the crevice, licking his wound and spitting out lumps of dust that got into his mouth when he fell. He was even afraid to imagine that he would have to get out into the daylight again, where eagles soared freely. But such is life in the steppe. You have no choice but to keep moving forward or perish. Illusion of salvation. Trapped by humans. Gradually, the days became shorter and shorter, and the nights colder. Winter was becoming an increasingly real threat. Snow had already dusted the ground several times, and although it melted by noon, there was an icy cold in the air. The kitten, whom life had made prematurely adult, wandered on, but one day he stumbled upon something new. An unfamiliar structure that towered on the edge of a gentle cliff. Fabric, wood, metal parts scattered around. All this was a remnant, apparently, of someone's camp or hunting ambush. He smelled a scent that remotely resembled the one he had felt near the nomads. The smell of humans. Tired and hungry, he dared to cautiously bypass this place. Perhaps there would be at least some food there. Leftovers. Bait. Instinct screamed, danger! But hopelessness pushed him forward. Suddenly, the kitten's paw fell into a metal loop. A clang rang out, sharply jerking him by his right hind paw, and the manul almost recoiled, feeling pain and horror. It was a trap. Maybe for a wolf or a fox, but the manul fell into it just as mercilessly. In panic, he began to twitch, twisting his paw, but every jerk pulled at a sharp pain. The loop did not break the bone, but securely fixed the limb. The tip of his tail twitched, his ears pressed to his head, his fur on end, his eyes wide with fear. This is how the first few minutes passed. Then came the realization of helplessness. Here he was, a little manul in a human trap in an open area. If the hunters returned here, he would have no chance. Time stretched out agonizingly long. A strong wind roamed the steppe. Flapping the remnants of fabric hanging in the wind, boards creaked, the sun was setting, and the manul trembled from cold and pain. He could not even dig a full-fledged nest in the ground. A strong loop held him. Sometimes he tried to jerk again, but each time he cried out in sharp pain. Although manuls are extremely secretive and make few sounds, in this situation, shock and fear made him plaintively mew and whine like a small kitten. Turning point of fate. Unexpected liberation. When despair became unbearable, the sound of footsteps broke through the thickening twilight. The kitten tensed up, pressing his ears to his head again from fear, realizing that it was most likely a human. For a moment, he even tried to hide, but it was impossible. The metal loop pulled at his paw, preventing him from hiding. It seemed like the end. A human, a young shepherd by appearance, saw a small animal in the trap. Perhaps he was not the one who set the trap. In his eyes flashed compassion, or perhaps curiosity about a strange but undoubtedly beautiful creature. Approaching closer, he noticed how the manul, shrinking, was trying to appear smaller and at the same time show his teeth, slightly opening his mouth in a warning hiss. The man slowly bent down, said something quietly, as if calming the animal. His movements were cautious, as if he was afraid of a sudden jump. He tried to loosen the metal mechanism while receiving a desperate swipe of claws on his hand. However, he had enough patience and determination. Several tense minutes and the cub was freed from the trap. A streak of blood flew up. A deep wound remained on his paw. The little predator, feeling terrible pain, tried to crawl away, hissing at his savior, not understanding that he had been freed to escape. The man sighed, took out a flask of water from his pocket and moistened a piece of cloth, trying to clean the paw from dirt and blood. The manul arched his back almost toward the flask, but more out of fear than out of rage. Carefully, the man stepped back a few steps, giving the animal space. The manul, still not understanding that before him was not an enemy, but rather a savior, stood up a couple of times convulsively and fell, unable to lean on his sore paw. At some point, he noticed that the man was no longer approaching but just stood quietly to the side. In this short moment, they met eyes. Fear mixed with courage shone in the kitten's eyes and compassion for the little sufferer in the young man's eyes. And suddenly, the wind broke the silence, dusting their faces with snow and sand. The manul staggered, but instinct pushed him to flee. Despite the pain, he rushed forward and disappeared into the twilight, leaving behind slightly noticeable traces of blood. The line between life and death. The steppe was ruthless. Injuries, hunger, cold. The manul had either to die from wounds and exhaustion or to find the last strength to fight for life. For several days, he ate practically nothing, sometimes managing to grab some insect or small lizard, but the food seemed tasteless and thirst tormented him more than hunger. The wound on his paw became inflamed. A fever began. The damp wind dried it but gave no chance for full healing. And so, after an endless string of cold days and nights, at the moment when the sun was setting and the colors of the sky resembled a rusty sunset, the manul, staggering, came out to an old thorny bush. By willpower, he was still trying to live, clinging to every breath. In this bush, he found relative protection from the wind. His tail lay motionless. His paw was still bleeding, although not as much as at first. A painful emptiness appeared in his eyes. It seemed that the end was near. Another victim of the cruel steppe. Memory of mother and inner monologue. At this time, in his consciousness, if one can say so about the feelings of a wild animal, the image of his mother began to surface. He seemed to hear her even breathing, feel the warmth of her fur, that smell that once meant safety. This ghostly image stood before his eyes, filling his heart with longing. He remembered, or felt subconsciously, how she taught them to lie in wait, how they pressed close to each other. If she were here now, she would lick his wound, warm him with her body, let him feel that he was not alone. But reality was different. The world outside this thorny branch relentlessly pressed down with its harshness. Whether it was a warm dream or a semi-forgetfulness is unknown, but the little manul fell asleep, not knowing if he would wake up in the morning. His breathing was frequent, with wheezing. When the sun rose, golden rays softly penetrated through the branches, illuminating his disheveled fur. Several small birds, sparrows wintering in the steppe, chirped on the branches, unaware of the drama unfolding below. However, the little ball of fur opened his eyes. He was still breathing. Restoration of spirit. Instincts do not fall silent. Later in the day, the air warmed up. After the night frost, sharp temperature drops sometimes allow insects to crawl out, and where there are insects, lizards and small mice may appear. The kitten felt that a residual desire to live stirred within him. It, like a thin spark, still smoldered. With difficulty, he crawled out of the shelter, looking around. His paw hurt, but it was already a little easier to walk. The damage at least was not increasing. The manul's instincts led him by barely perceptible scents. He noticed a small grey mouse sleep under a stone. Gathering his last strength, he lay in wait. His heart pounded in his chest, tension grew. The mouse poked out for a moment and then a swift attack. He missed but did not give up. Knowing that such an opportunity might not present itself again, he persistently sniffed, circled around the stone, until after a few minutes he managed to grab his prey, which ran too close to his shelter. Greedily clutching the warm body, the kitten ate every crumb, feeling hot life coursing through his veins. Although it was a tiny step, it was precisely it that gave impetus to further recovery. With each new day, he learned to apply manul instincts more confidently, to lie in wait, not to chase rodents in vain, but to wait and attack at the decisive moment. His fur began to shine slightly again, and his paw was gradually healing. Of course, he remained lame, and this limp would not leave him for the rest of his life. But manuls are resilient animals, capable of surviving in the harshest conditions. Time passed and death still loomed on the horizon, but now instinct and endurance given by nature stood between it and the kitten. New encounter with people, apparent freedom. While the little manul limped through the steppe, learning to live in solitude, many weeks passed. Winter was already nearing its end. The sun began to appear a little earlier and set beyond the horizon a little later. And one fine day, something happened that he certainly did not expect. He again smelled the scent of people. Someone had lit a fire nearby. The kitten caught a familiar smell. Apparently, someone was heating food, possibly meat. Saliva filled his mouth. He kept his distance, but curiosity, that very feline trait that can be fatal, prevailed. He crept along a dried-up ditch, trying to get closer and peering at the figures of people sitting by the fire. It was a couple of travelers, judging by their meager equipment and rambling speech, or perhaps local residents who had decided to take a break. Next to them lay things, a bag of provisions, possibly bread, remnants of soup or roasted meat. The manul smelled these scents, desperately wanting to eat. Winter had been so scarce in food. However, he knew, people are danger. What if they had a trap again? What if they decided to catch him? But hunger outweighed fear. He decided to sneak up to a bag or bowl left on the ground. But his steps turned out to be noticeable. One of the people stirred, shuddered, saw a grey ash zverok with big eyes and thick fur. "Manul!" exclaimed the man. The second one also turned around, their voices filled with delight and lively interest, because meeting a manul in the wild is a great rarity, especially one who almost does not run away, but only cautiously stares at people. The kitten froze, his heart beating deafeningly. He wanted to run, but understood that he would not have time to run far. His paw was still not in the best condition, and people could catch up with him if they had dogs or horses. Fortunately, they had no animals. One of them slowly reached out his hand, trying to show that he would not cause harm. Perhaps in another time and place, the manul would not have hesitated and fled. But cold, hunger, fatigue and curiosity mixed together, forcing him to stand still. The man, reaching for his backpack, pulled out a small piece of meat and threw it on the ground 2 steps away from the kitten. The attractive smell made the manul's head spin. Quietly, almost silently, he took a step forward and sank his teeth into the piece, and then, growling, dragged it to himself, ready at any second to drop everything and slip away. But the man did not make sudden movements, apparently understanding that any action would scare away the animal. This was repeated several more times. The interest in the eyes of the people was mixed with some kind of care or curiosity. They understood. This young manul looked sick or wounded. The bloody trail he left on the snow indicated that his paw had not yet fully healed, but they were apparently afraid to touch him. And rightly so, because a frightened predator could show aggression. They allowed him to eat what he could find. Remnants of meat, pieces of bread. Although the manul was not happy with bread, it was unnatural food for him. Having satiated himself, the kitten felt something like relief. Finally, when the people decided that it was time for them to gather, they cautiously got up. The manul, seeing movement, froze. He still did not know what to expect. One of the men slowly walked towards the little zverek. The manul stepped back, pressing himself to the ground. The guy froze, seeing the predator's tension. They looked at each other, and at some point the man, apparently, took pity on the zverek. He took out a small handkerchief from his pocket, in which another portion of food was wrapped. He put it aside, then turned around and walked away. Such a gesture could be a sign of sympathy, misunderstanding, or simply an attempt to help. But the manul, taught by bitter experience, could not take anything at face value. Nevertheless, as soon as the people disappeared over the edge of the cliff, he again moved towards the leftover food, greedily ate everything and hid. Path to adulthood and the last precious encounter. Spring was already felt in the air. Snow was melting, water filled the lowlands, and life was slowly reviving in the steppe. Small rodents were returning, bringing out their young. A more favorable time was coming for the manul. There was slightly more food, and the kitten, already almost a teenager, was able to hunt regularly. Although his paw still made itself known, he learned to compensate for his limp with a precise jump and surprise attack. His body grew stronger, his fur became thick again, silvery gray with a light pattern, and his gaze adultly stern. He did not yet realize that he had once been on the verge of death, that he had miraculously survived the trap and endured the storm, but instinctively felt he had become stronger. One day, tracking ground squirrels, he stumbled upon a familiar scent. His heart beat faster, as if memories arose before his eyes. It was the scent of his congener, and not a stranger. Quietly, with silent steps, he walked along a rocky cliff until he reached a small cave. There sat an adult female manul, well groomed with luxurious fur. For a moment, his chest ached. Mother? But no, this smell was different. Not so close, not the one that was imprinted in his memory forever from childhood. She also sensed his presence and arched her back, ready to fight if he posed a threat. They did not engage in battle. Gradually, tension eased and they parted ways, each in his own direction. Manuls are solitary animals. They do not stay together, except for the period of reproduction and raising kittens. Perhaps, if he were older and stronger, he would have tried to win her attention in the spring, when the mating season comes, but now he was still too young. However, this short meeting with a creature like himself meant that he was no longer alone in this boundless space, and this gave him a vague sense of comfort. Bitter price of survival and hope. The life of a manul is harsh, and most kittens do not survive to adulthood. But our little lame hero managed to hold out, overcome traps, hunger, and predator attacks. Everything he had endured made him secretive, cautious, but also in some ways a wise predator. He adopted the art of survival, passed down to him by heredity, despite the absence of his mother nearby. Summer was approaching, the steppe acquired scorched sandy hues, and in this boundless space the young manul continued his journey, invisible to most people. Sometimes, passing through a familiar rocky area, he seemed to hear a rustle, similar to his mother's breathing. A light gust of wind always reminded him of that unforgettable moment when she was still nearby. He had no way of knowing where his relatives had gone. Perhaps they had also scattered across the steppe, trying to survive. But in the depths of his consciousness remained a faint glimmer of hope for a chance meeting.